Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Formula 1 is finally back and it's Charles Leclerc taking a hat-trick of pole positions in Baku. Unbelievable lap that he put in to take pole yet again here and beat out the Red Bulls and destroy his teammate Carlos Sainz. We'll get into the big shock though, probably George Russell out in Q2. Mercedes not in a great spot it seems so far this weekend. George Russell not at all happy at some of the decisions his team has made and the straight line speed deficit of their car. Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. No glasses today, I got contacts in, so sorry if that caught some of you off guard. Let's dive straight in. Firstly, with all the upgrades, the full list of them that came through this weekend. Red Bull, of course, with that new side pod inlet they've shown off, which apparently might even be a circuit-specific thing. It depends, right, what they'll do going forwards, but it's probably focused towards straight line speed that they don't probably need, but that they're going to unlock anyway. So lots of changes for the Red Bull. I think we heard a couple of weeks ago now that they reckon that's worth roughly 0.2 of a second, which is a relatively substantial upgrade given where Red Bull are and the fact that they probably don't need them, but they got them anyway. Ferrari with a new rear wing, but outside of that, nothing much changing. Mercedes with a few small tweaks. We saw the rear of the car near the diffuser that we discussed yesterday. A front suspension change, a couple of other very minor things. The major things really coming for partly Alpine, but they didn't really get to show it, and also McLaren with loads of changes, primarily to the floor, and that really seemed to work out well for McLaren today. Impressively so, that we'll see here in a second. It's still a brick in a straight line, and they're still running a rather high rear wing, surprisingly so for Baku, but still, impressive performance from them, and these are the other changes as well. Alpha Tauri with a fair few things, and Yuki Tsunoda, man, what a driver he is. I'm really glad to see him performing well this year, and we'll discuss that in a second. Firstly, though, the disaster class from Alpine begins with Gasly's car breaking down very quickly into practice. A hydraulic leak, I believe, caused his car to do this. They managed to work very hard over the coming couple of hours to put his car back together, replace the parts necessary, and actually get him ready to go for qualifying. But before Gasly put it into the barriers, De Vries put it into the barriers. It was funny really because De Vries, despite being, I would say, the weakest driver of the season so far, I'm not exactly massively surprised by that given his questionable results, let's say, in other categories relative when you look at the context, let's just say. But he done a good job in practice, right? And everyone was like, okay, De Vries, comeback is on. He was beating Tsunoda in practice, put in a good lap, and then he bangs it into the wall straight away. Red flag comes out and ruins what was actually a pretty competitive Alpha Tauri today, it must be said. And then, I mean, Gasly, he's got to pay for dinner for his mechanics, right? Because they just spent 2 hours putting his car back together, and then he bangs it in the wall and goes out in Q1. So not ideal for them. Also, Kevin Magnussen had an issue with drive. I think he had the same, potentially not the same thing, but he had an electronics issue or something, a power loss in practice, and they ran it back in qualifying again. So he had to go out in Q1. The other two drivers, Hulkenberg and Zhou, out of there as well. So yeah, the Haas not looking as good as I thought they might this weekend, and Zhou getting out qualified by Valtteri Bottas. Q2 though, Ocon, Albon. Albon believes he could have got to Q3 actually, because I believe his lap got blocked by Sainz, and he reckons that he might have been able to find the around about 1.7 of a second he needed to get past Hamilton. But it was George Russell eliminated by 0.004 of a second. Both Williams into Q2 was quite nice to see as well, but the Mercedes wasn't really there in Q2. It kind of did better in Q3 in the hands of Hamilton, but yeah, both Mercedes struggled here to put together a lap. Russell was making a couple of small mistakes, but that Mercedes, I mean, look, we expected it, right? I didn't think the Mercedes was going to be very good around here. It's a very much traction-based circuit. The Mercedes has been, what, 4th fastest in Bahrain, another more traction-based circuit where it's more rear limited on the car. Obviously, Australia and Jeddah, more front-limited circuit, i.e. higher speed corners where the front grip is what's relevant, whereas at this circuit, lots of 90-degree corners where the rear traction and rear grip is absolutely necessary, and that's where Mercedes generally struggle. So not really surprised to see Mercedes being poor, and also straight line speed is massively important around here, and that was kind of lacking. Not as much though as you might think. We'll see here in a second. So Russell was out, he said like, oh sugar, or something like that on the radio, which are pretty entertaining stuff, and he just said we don't have the pace around here. And even in his post-race interview or post-qualifying interview, we'll see in a second, he says, I don't think we could have got more than P8, but then Hamilton got P5, so you know, it's kind of interesting what's going on internally there at Mercedes. But let's talk Q3, because man, Charles Leclerc, we know this guy's a monster in qualifying. That's not exactly a shock. We've known it for years, and he's taken pole position in 21 and 22 around this track. But to do it again against that Red Bull is nothing short of spectacular. His qualifying lap was miraculous, and well, first of all, they put together identical times. Verstappen and Leclerc both, they set the same time. Verstappen said it just before, which means he gets to keep the P1, But, I mean, yeah, you don't see that too often, the identical times, but it happens here. And that actually broke the all-time qualifying lap record around Baku, despite the fact that the DRS is now slightly later on in terms of its activation. But Leclerc wanted that record for himself, and he put together a monster lap, shaved another 2/10 off that one. I mean, the commitment in turn 1, his sector 2 was unbelievable. And yes, Leclerc's had his couple of problems over the years at Baku, especially in the castle section, but this guy is so good around here, it's ridiculous. Even before he got in the Ferrari in the Sauber, he was still doing stuff like this in quali and the race. 3 poles in a row. You know, is this going to turn into another Leclerc pole at Verstappen win? It probably is, but still, it's great to see nonetheless. At least there's a car that isn't a Red Bull on pole for the first time of all the races we have had so far. So these were the overall sector times. Leclerc with a 140.2, phenomenal lap. Verstappen about 2/10 back. Perez another further 10th back from that. I think, yeah, he lost a little bit in the final sector, really, Perez. The Mercedes lost like all of its time in sector 1 and sector 2, but I think they made a tweak before qualifying in terms of their rear wing, because their straight line speed was actually very competitive. You see here the average best sector 3 was a 24.7, 24.7, 24.7. Verstappen did a 24.6, but outside of that, Hamilton and Sainz are basically exactly the same, or Hamilton and Perez even had exactly the same sector 3 times, which is basically all in a straight line. So the Mercedes actually was more competitive in a straight than they were earlier on. For example, the McLaren at 25.0, and also key to note though, Alonso and Stroll also in a 24.7, but I don't believe they had DRS working for them when they actually were on their quickest lap, because you guys can see here that if you compare Hamilton Alonso's sector 1 and sector 2 times, Alonso should have been about 2/10 up, but I don't think his DRS was working properly on potentially the actual fast running that he did, so he could have been further up here. Alonso could have been P4 potentially, but Hamilton did a good enough lap on his first run, got it into P5, which was pretty impressive going, all things considered, given where that Mercedes is around a circuit like this. And I guess they made the sacrifice that straight line speed is going to be more beneficial in a race scenario, that, you know, they'll take some of the sacrifices in sector 1, sector 2, but that might not be the correct decision, as Russell is going to say in a second, because they weren't looking so good. Unreal from Yuki Tsunoda, by the way. Like, to put it into P8 in qualifying is absolutely fantastic from him, so congratulations to Tsunoda and AlphaTauri putting together a stellar performance. And is this just Leclerc being ridiculous in Baku and in qualifying in general, or is the SF23 actually coming good? Because we were promised, right, that this year's Ferrari was going to be a second faster than last year's. This is the first time we've really seen that, and it goes 1.1 seconds faster in quali than he did last year. Now, let's be honest here, the Ferrari has been pretty competitive in qualifying so far. Jeddah, he wasn't too far away. Bahrain, it wasn't too bad. Australia was a bit of a struggle, but still, the Ferrari has been way better in quali than it has been in the race. Factor in the Leclerc buff, factor in the fact that Red Bull probably set their car up for the race, and I would still expect to see a Red Bull 1-2 tomorrow and Sunday, but still, it does open a little bit of a can of worms here. Maybe the Ferrari's better than we actually thought. So Leclerc pole, then Verstappen. This, of course, by the way, setting the grid for Sunday. So this is for Sunday's Grand Prix, not for the sprint. The sprint will have another qualifying session, which is, you know, I wish they did an entirely different format for that, to be honest, because it's going to be the same thing again, you would imagine. Apart from the fact that the drivers are unlikely to push as hard, because if they crash in qualifying today, then it's not ideal, but they can fix the car for tomorrow and Sunday. Whereas if you crash in qualifying tomorrow for the sprint race or the sprint shootout, then your car is probably dusted for the sprint. So that's, you know, not really what you want to have. So Leclerc, Verstappen, Perez, then Sainz, Hamilton, Alonso, Norris, Tsunoda, Stroll, Piastri. That is your top 10. And fair play to McLaren, their upgrades, bringing them 2 Mercedes-powered cars, or what, 5 Mercedes-powered cars in the top 10. None of them, though, George Russell, and both McLarens there, which is a pretty promising sign, I think, for the rest of their season, given how poor they are and still are on the straights. But yeah, their performance elsewhere has got a lot better with those new upgrades. Pretty good stuff. Hamilton says that's all the car's got, mate. Sorry about that, but I don't really think he could have done any more. And these were the numbers in free practice. Mercedes are about 331. Aston Martin with their new rear wing, and that might be why they had the DRS issues, because they brought a circuit-specific rear wing here to Baku, and it doesn't seem like that was perfected as they would potentially like it to have been, but they were quite fast in free practice. Mercedes are way off the pace, but they did up their pace either in terms of engine modes or just in terms of potential slight changes to their rear wing, because come qualifying, the Red Bull was the fastest at 342, the Ferrari down at 334, and the Mercedes at about 336. So they weren't really losing all that much time in a straight line, maybe a tenth to the Red Bull over the course of the straights, but it was really sector 1, sector 2 where they were struggling. And as I say, those are the real traction zones out of corners, rear limited, where the Mercedes right now with its setup just struggles way more than the Red Bull and the Ferrari and the Aston. But the Aston wasn't fast in a straight line because I think there's some DRS issues on their fastest laps. Otherwise, Hamilton might have been down in P6 or P7. Hamilton says, look, we are slower on the straight. I think they had a huge deficit in the straight in practice. As I say, in qualifying wasn't quite the case. And look, they're also slower in the middle sector though. So lots to think about for Mercedes. Wanted to share Russell's perspective on this as well, because he says, look, the team made some of the wrong decisions. Last time they had a sprint in Brazil, they hit the ground running. This time wasn't the case, so learnings to take from their perspective. But yeah, I don't know. Russell doesn't seem happy with how things have gone, and he can understand why.
But I was given everything. The lap was strong. Made a mistake in my last one, which may have just crept me in to Q3, but I don't think we'd have been able to qualify much higher than P8. So yeah, it's a funny sport, this one. Sometimes, going from qualifying on the front row last week to, both of us, well, myself being out in Q2 and Lewis, just getting in with P10.
Already.
I mean, I wasn't feeling great in practice, to be honest. I would have loved to have done a few more laps. We were sat in the garage for quite a long time, doing a few bits and bobs, which, it's so easy in hindsight to say should have, could have, would have. And a bit of a learning for, this sprint race. I mean, last sprint race we hit the ground running and we were flying every session. And this one, it's been the opposite, and I think that's the way it goes sometimes with these events.
Toto Wolff did put a bit more of a spin on it though, because as he says, we matched Leclerc and Verstappen in the first 3 corners, but in that middle sector, the Ferrari and Leclerc is outstanding because Carlos Sainz got mudded today, 8 tenths behind. I know that he kind of messed up in Q1 a bit. He had to take an extra set of tyres, and that cost him at the end. But still, Leclerc dropped a real serious statement on Sainz's head today, it's got to be said. And Toto Wolff goes on to say, we didn't put any upgrades on the car this weekend. That comes in Imola, so we're doing the best we can with the package, and just says there just isn't enough downforce, especially relevant in Sector 1, Sector 2. So understandable stuff. Hamilton also gave the comments, this is not the position we want as a team. We exist to win. But lots of work to do to get to that point. Pretty good going from Hamilton really to manage to put it P5, given the fact that the McLaren over their perfect lap and the Aston Martin would have been faster than the Mercedes, but McLaren and Aston, for the dearest reasons, can never quite put that together. Red Bull, in terms of the ideal lap, might still have been slightly faster, but I think Verstappen had a bit of a poor P1, which marginally hurt him, but I would still expect them to get the job done in the race. So that's the question, right, going forward into tomorrow's sprint shootout and then the sprint race itself. What are we going to see? The good thing is that if tomorrow we see qualifying is a little bit more tame because the drivers will want to take less risks in quali because they're only qualifying for the sprint where there's less points up for grabs compared to the actual Grand Prix on Sunday. But even if tomorrow, let's say Leclerc gets it on pole again for the sprint and Verstappen wins the race, then at least come Sunday, Leclerc's going to be on pole again, right? And we don't kind of get, robbed of what could be an interesting start for Sunday's Grand Prix. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.